I stepped in this. My phone started to be SS7 exploited, and I traced it back to a bunch of assholes that are directly tied to this shit. So I'm going to tell this history. I'm going to explain this. I'm going to showcase the laundering crimes that Francis Sheldon did. I'm going to go through his genealogy, his financial history, showcase how the island changed hands, and how these same network of individuals and the same tactics are being exploited to this day. And, I mean, the associated criminal network that continues to operate with impunity associated with this is appalling. And demands attention. Welcome to the Port Huron Statement. Excuse me for the time since the last episode. I had to figure out some audio issues and some other technical issues. While I was also digging pretty deeply into, local connections to historical criminality and money laundering, and specifically the way, an entire sort of system emerges from a singular node. I'm going to, over the course of the next month or so, reveal the system. It's a network. It's more than just a story. It's really a series of cases, really, that exposes how power, corruption, and exploitation have metastasized across decades, institutions, geographies, from North Fox Island to Epstein, from Port Huron to Washington, D.C., New York City, Silicon Valley, and Tel Aviv. I'm going to recount for you the visceral, undeniable history that exposes the tactics, system, organization, individuals, and ideologies that are shaping our societies in the shadows and utilizing criminal tactics with all but absolute impunity. The goal is to methodologically connect the dots to present and implicate this local apparatus and how it extends beyond, revealing a complex information control and population exploitation infrastructure that has been building for decades and which has a genesis locally in Port Huron, Michigan, and specifically with North Fox Island. And this is bearing itself out more and more as more Epstein files get released. The connection between Epstein and North Fox Island and Port Huron and Epstein becomes more and more clear. We're talking about a network, a business model, a conspiracy, but not conspiracy theory. It's not a group of villains in a back room. It's a machine, one that's been running for decades, reminiscent and rhyming through centuries of inescapable cruelty and human self-destruction. And it's not just in the shadows. It's also in the light. It's in the churches, the charities, the banks, the intelligence agencies, and the tech companies. It's in the way we're taught to think, to obey, and to consume. The entire infrastructure of our culture has been essentially impregnated with an agenda, and crucial to that is a radical acceptance of authority and the status quo. The ability to steer belief and manufacture consent is the impetus behind the countless data centers popping up across the digital heartland, across the entire country and far beyond. It's in how we are taught and how we develop identity, culture, subculture, faith and belief, friend and foe. It's a worldview and a tactic that permeates how we are collectively and individually rewarded and punished. This system doesn't just exploit people, it shapes them, it chooses them, tests them and molds them, it creates them. It takes the vulnerable, the poor, the young, the desperate, and it selects for the most depraved and sociopathic, the most ambitious or malleable, the most desirable or attractive, and it turns them into tools for control, tools for profit, tools for containment, tools to institute informational control, to apply intimidation, to apply violence, to participate in lawfare, surveillance, gang stalking if you dig or if you try to fight back, gaslighting and altercation baiting, pathologization and discreditation, positioning predators to silence through psychology, calling you crazy, and even falsifying diagnoses. Cases abound with medical manipulation and misdiagnosis in this area and beyond. Tools to discredit inconvenient truths to the established power brokers. Examples like Demian Nagub and Bazo and Frank Pilato are in the news, but the pattern of utilizing falsified medical or psychiatric diagnosis extends far beyond these cases, and in more insidious examples, it's often to realize a legal or financial goal, and this history continues to plague in this habit Port Huron and the St. Clair County area, especially, as well as the entire nation. These same tactics have been historically used to discredit victims of sexual violence and financial exploitation by wealthy individuals, including those in the Epstein case, in the Weinstein cases, and a whole host of other cases which will reveal themselves all to be ultimately interrelated. The more we as a society dig, the more you as an individual dig. They will seek to ruin your reputation if you happen to know or be spreading any of this inconvenient material. They will seek to signal to their network to target you. Wonderful examples present themselves currently in the form of the Epstein case and victims. The deliberate inclusion of the victims' names and addresses while not including the names of the perpetrators is a means of dog whistle signaling retaliation and witness and victim suppression and intimidation. They have developed entire manuals, literal manuals, in the intelligence community designed to make sure no one believes you. And if those don't work, other methods will be sought. Terminal operations. The methods I have personally even been face-to-face with. The methods that are germane to the local population acutely through people like Josh Conant. That's... Port Huron, Michigan is on the edge of Lake Huron. It's an international border town, international crossing, a place where also in the 1970s a man named Francis Duffield Sheldon flew boys from St. Clair County International Airport to a private island he had purchased under the sanction of church and charity. He had developed a veneer of both religious philanthropy and organizing a boys' camp, but it wasn't actually philanthropic. It was a state-funded, tax-deductible CSAM production venture, and it was a market for the wealthy to pick the objects of their sexual preference, reminiscent of events occupying the same function currently in Port Huron. Port Huron, a place where decades later the same families, the same tactics, the same networks are still operating. Some names change, some don't, and if you start asking questions, you'll find the system doesn't just ignore you, it responds. And if you find the right nerve, the conniption fits can help illuminate the nature, involvement, tactics, and associates that compose this still surviving network that can trace its lineage back to North Fox Island and Francis Duffield Sheldon, Dyer Grossman, and oh my gosh, Richards. Carl Richards is the prosecutor, but Gerald Richards. This is the introduction to a series of Port Huron Statement episodes, which is going to, in totality, expose the tactics, the organizations, and the personnel that connect the threads from North Fox Island to today's local power brokers, both in Port Huron and beyond. How this contemporary influence and power paradigm is built on layers of deception, financial, psychological, and technological, is the product of a history of success. How this network and its acolytes and subordinates use shell companies, charities, and churches to launder money, launder reputations, and launder people. It is a system that turns the desperate into victims, victims into perpetrators, and perpetrators into fully controlled assets. They utilize access to manage information through influence like religion or education, access through media curation, and the steering of opinion and perception through cultural, political, and religious lenses designed to enable the greater tightening of the grip on the population. So these data centers and these subsequent AIs that are being utilized are ultimately being utilized to justify, conceal, and enable the very same infrastructure I'm discussing that leverages desperation and poverty and child exploitation, the manipulation of the fiat currency, and cronyism. This manufacture of fictitious history and fantasy as policy that has become commonplace, but it has always been present in American politics. This podcast and the next series of episodes will reveal how these networks of exploitation have created a system of self-perpetuating power and influence behind the scenes, utilizing laundering, bureaucracy, criminality, and child sexual exploitation in a lineage that extends to current St. Clair County and Port Huron authorities and influences and power brokers, I guess you would call them. And this system depends on secrecy, and that's exactly what I intend to disrupt in these episodes. Secrecy becomes hard to maintain when the truth starts seriously leaking out. When people start connecting the dots, when they realize the same names, the same tactics, the same modus operandi keep showing up from North Fox Island to the Oakland County child killer, from Jackie Woodburn and the evangelical churches to Silicon Valley boardrooms, from the CIA to local police departments, from scandals like Charlie Kirk to information control in the cable news platforms. This podcast isn't about the dots, it's about people who've tried to expose them and the people who've tried to bury them. It's about the past because the past is still with us, and it's also about the future because the system isn't done yet. It's evolving, adapting, it's finding new ways to control and exploit, and the advent of massive data centers and the utilization of AI has been largely in pursuit of the ability to steer the public away from realizations like the realization that Trump's directly tied to Epstein. And steering the public and digesting massive amounts of microphone data, camera data, etc., to identify individuals that are perhaps starting to wake up to the deceptions and pump them with media that will dissuade them, is the foundation. Creating informational control and perceptive control is the foundation of the inspiration to build these data centers. So if you're listening to this, ask yourself, what do you really know about the world around you and how it's being run and how much of it has been managed for you? Because the system doesn't just want your obedience, it wants your complicity. And the first step in realizing a better future is to refuse to continue to accept a managed and engineered reality, the simulacrum. The lies and distractions on cable news, the obvious lies in the State of the Union addresses and town halls, the lawfare and ignored criminality, the selective reporting, and the establishment of a narrative disconnected from reality and only designed to convenience the domination of an unjustifiable system, and to those that system has chosen to reward and protect. It's not really about what they do or what anyone does, it's about who they are, how much wealth they have. At this point, this isn't a nation of laws, it's a nation of domination by the ultra-wealthy and by the subsequent hierarchy of authority that determines legal outcomes far above and beyond any basis in reality at this juncture. And this has been in the oven for a long time. This is a problem that's been deeply ingrained into both the left, quote, left and right, and the false binary that they both have built and feed into. But there is a unique prevalence of depraved tactics and protection of massive child sex trafficking networks. The RNC is somewhat more culpable, though both are culpable. And Clinton's close relationship with AOL really confirms his stance on all of it. And I'm getting off topic here, excuse me. Over many installations, we're going to follow the money, the power, and the lies from a remote island in Lake Michigan to the halls of power in D.C. And far beyond. We're going to show you how the system operates, who protects it, and how it's still shaping our world today. From the Oval Office to Iran, from St. Clair County to St. Paul's Cathedral. Pay attention. The truth isn't just out there. It's right here. It's right at your doorstep, globally germane, and it's waiting for you to find it. Before Jeffrey Epstein ever bought a private island in the Caribbean, another wealthy man was flying boys from Rhode Island in Lake Michigan, Francis Sheldon. Sheldon wasn't some backwoods monster. He was a Yale-educated geologist from a prominent family, a part-time professor at Wayne State University, and he sat on the board of many different educational entities, including Cranbrook. If you're familiar with that, it's actually a really elite private school. He became engaged heavily in Big Brothers Big Sisters, formed a network of charities, a church entity, and on paper appears as a philanthropist, but this is the virtue shielding element. It's not philanthropy, it's predation, and this has become commonplace. In 1960, Sheldon bought North Fox Island, which is it's over 800-acre island in Lake Michigan, near the Beaver Island area. He built cabins, added to the existing cabins, an airstrip and a little dock. For 15 years, he was running a fake charity camp, flying boys out there, largely from St. Joseph's in Port Huron and other locations that they were recruiting young boys, and just children in general, depending on the appetites of the individuals that they were coordinating with on North Fox Island. Largely it was young boys because they're part of this BL movement, this entire series of dog whistles, which continue to be suspiciously prevalent in some of the language utilized by local organizations, which is something we're going to go into later. But he was even able to get state money, and this is something that he'll see that's going on to this day. But for this boys' retreat, that was largely targeting, so-called troubled youth, and it was, framed as an opportunity, an opportunity to get like the summer camp experience, despite being sort of underprivileged, but really was a massive child pornography and blackmail operation that was escorting kids from St. Clair County International Airport here in Port Huron to North Fox Island. That was the route. In 1975, Sheldon created the tax-exempt organization Brother Paul's Children's Mission. He had also created other organizations like the Ocean Living Institute, the Church of the New Revelation. They had another boys' camp in Tennessee as well, which we'll get into later. There's quite a few of these they had ended up creating between a small network of what they call boy lovers, more or less. The better living. Oh my gosh. Anyway, the name was chosen with intention. It sounds religious, wholesome, and trustworthy. It sounds like it's been around for a long time. The mission, according to its brochures, was to help boys with reading problems or emotional counseling, to give opportunities to the underprivileged to enjoy, a premier camp on Lake Michigan. But Brother Paul's had never obtained the required licenses from the state. However, this had been overlooked, and I still enjoyed getting grants and accepting donations while really just operating a child porn and blackmail operation because of Sheldon's social standing, his connections, and his old money pedigree. Because Francis Sheldon is the descendant of, Russell Alger, who was a Michigan governor and a secretary of war in the federal government. He's also the descendant of Alicia Sheldon. It was actually the Revolutionary War relationship. I'm going through his entire genealogy. My name's Roger Sheldon. There's a interesting relationship. Anyway, we'll go into that later too. It's not I'm not directly, but indirectly related, I guess you would say. That doesn't matter. This sort of history within the family of engaging in the military-industrial complex and the intelligence apparatus, as well as having deep integration within the financial sort of elite in Grosse Pointe and through assorted close connections with things like Goldman Sachs. He really had, he was positioned to be virtually untouchable through influence networks, which shouldn't exist like that, right? Just because your family's X, Y, and Z doesn't mean that you are above being prevented from operating a child sexual exploitation business and blackmail business. Like, it's so vicious, sort of what they did and have continued to influence, because this became a paradigm for continued sort of compromat and influence operations. There's just no justification for enabling anyone in our society to do this. It's the most destructive possible, to enable child sex trafficking, and then also how that dominoes into a blackmail economy, making it so that a large portion of our politicians are effectively captured utilizing this type of compromat, and a lot of donor class individuals will not support politicians that don't have this type of compromise. Like, if they're not holding this in their pocket and they don't know they can destroy that politician at any moment, they won't back them. They want to have assurance that they will do absolutely whatever the donor class backer is going to want them to do, period. And compelled obedience is a way to achieve that type of assurance. You have to understand, Sheldon didn't work alone. He had two key accomplices, but a major network. Dyer Grossman and Gerald Richards. Grossman was a Cornell graduate and a teacher at a couple different elite boarding schools, and these premier camps. He had a taste for the finer things and a sort of upper middle class upbringing, but also had a penchant for child pornography. He was a boy lover. He had a penchant for better living, which is explicitly the term that they were using. The one magazine that they were publishing was Better Living Monthly, and it was because of the prevalence of that being a euphemism for BL, boy lover, better living. Richards and Sheldon, Sheldon didn't work alone. He had two key accomplices, Dyer Grossman and Gerald Richards. Grossman was a Cornell graduate, a teacher at elite boarding schools, a man with a taste for child pornography, but a history of, upper middle class and I guess you call it premier education, whereas Richards was a gym teacher at St. Joseph's in Port Huron, and he also was a member of the Episcopal Church. He had a young son sort of in the 70s when this started to really kick off. And he had developed a network because he'd worked in an adult bookstore and started to sort of copy down addresses and identities of individuals that had proclivities for better living or boy love shit for years while going to college in this adult bookstore. So it was really a national network of it was a captive market that he had really in his pocket. I don't think Richard and Sheldon met through the coded ads that Richards had been placing in these adult magazines. Ads advertising his magician services for hire with euphemisms about featuring a young boy being eager to meet you and please you type thing. After months of correspondence over the mail order system that Gerald Richards was exploiting, Sheldon and Richards meet in person. And at this point, Sheldon, gets Richard better equipment, better car, and essentially Richards expanded the milieu of boys that he could access greatly, and also created this network of interested individuals that would later kind of become the foundation of what becomes a blackmail economy. Sheldon bought Richards a Cadillac to replace an orange Pinto that he was using that said Jerry the Magician on it, which, I don't know. It was set up to where Richards would be like a recruiter who would find boys. They had whole processes for this, how to avoid culpability. There's pretty much a manual for this, but Richards was a gym teacher who had daily access. He had essentially groomed, handpicked, kind of knew who was vulnerable. They liked boys 11 to 13, but sometimes as young as 8. They liked poor households without a father, or a father who was addicted to drugs, or someone that was integrated into some element of their network. They also had a lot of parents that would actively sell their children into these networks. So they liked to find boys that would not have an easy access to recourse. They like to meet kids in church. One thing that Gerald Richards would do is he would go through their mothers and tell them the kids had been selected for camp scholarship, for whatever, he needed to invent based on them fitting some desirable description that a client had, given them. And so, they essentially go to the parents and say, your child's been selected to attend this premier camp for his whatever, insert bullshit, scholarship justification here. They would often, mothers unknowingly, and some knowingly, parents would drive their sons to the county airport where Francis Sheldon's private plane would wait and then take them to North Fox Island. Once there, immediately these boys would notice there's cameras everywhere. It was passed off as though it was being utilized for a documentary about child development, and then they have this program, and this follows the secret paradigm for enabling and advancing child sexual exploitation. They called it loss of sight. Boys would be separated from the group one at a time in seemingly happenstance ways. A man the child was unfamiliar with and couldn't identify would inappropriately touch the boy. Many kids would immediately tell the chaperone who brought them or do something else. This is called like a red light in the secret paradigm. I can't believe I know this shit. I don't like knowing this shit. But again, I stepped in this. My phone started to be SS7 exploited, and I traced it back to a bunch of assholes that are directly tied to this shit. So I'm going to tell this history. I'm going to explain this. I'm going to showcase the laundering crimes that Francis Sheldon did. I'm going to go through his genealogy, his financial history, showcase how the island changed hands, and how these same network of individuals and the same tactics are being exploited to this day, not only to traffic children, but also to utilize the trafficking of children for compromat to leverage obedience on, politicians, etc., whatever. And, the associated criminal network that continues to operate with impunity associated with this is appalling. And demands attention. But anyway, so they would be separated from the group and inappropriately touched, and then so if then the chaperone would try and convince the boy it was no big deal, it was perfectly normal. If they couldn't be convinced, or was threatening to tell or whatever, the excuse was, I just lost sight of him for a while. The perpetrator would be essentially kept away from the individual, so they could never thumb who it was. But the idea is to always find green lights, people that won't say anything or can be intimidated off of saying anything, or can be made to feel shame and can be therefore blackmailed by it even happening to enable it to continue happening or to continue to contain it. And then once you have this sort of history, then you can use it to exploit the kids for years. And it did. It worked for years. The investigation only began when several mothers brought their sons to the police station, and it really continues to be wrought with problems and interference from the very beginning.